Hi there, my name's Eli. I'm a community manager for TechSoup, and I'm delighted to have you all here today. This is one of our Public Good App House events here at TechSoup, which means it's an event focused on the needs of makers, social entrepreneurs, and people building unique benefit and tools for civil society. Building tools takes money sometimes. So today we're going to talk about how you can leverage the nonprofit model to attract grants, even if you aren't currently set up as a charitable nonprofit. Today we've got Aretha Simons, who is the founder of Multiplying Talents International. First of all, Aretha is a retired Navy veteran with an extensive wealth of experience in nonprofit setup, grant writing, grant reviews, and all of that. She's written several books to basically put some of her ideas together and really sharpen it. And as she's gone through that journey, she has actually been invited by people like Oprah to address the US Senate on nonprofit fundraising. That's a bit of a vote of confidence. I have never had Oprah tap me on my shoulder and say, I need you to come to Washington. Aretha has conducted workshops and seminars across the nation for colleges, churches, and conferences, including renowned organizations like the Disney Entrepreneur Center and the Department of Labor. So we are in the right hands. Over to you, Aretha.
Thank you so much. Before we get started, I do want to say and make this disclaimer. I am not an attorney, so I cannot provide any legal advice, but I have been preparing 501c3s since 1999. I started with my own 501c3. Then I started helping other people. Next, it evolved into a business. I started writing my own grants. Next thing you know, that evolved into a business. I got to be asked to be on grant review board. So my experience is over 20 years. And so I know a little bit. I'm not saying I know everything because things change, but I did want to make that disclaimer. Now, today we're talking about doubling your impact, why your for-profit business should have a nonprofit arm. So I would love to know who here has just a for-profit, who here has just a nonprofit, or do you have both? I would love to find out in the chat. So you're going to hear me say the word nonprofit arm. You're also going to hear me say subsidiary. So you might hear me say having something under another organization. So you hear those words interchangeably. But before we get into the whys and the hows, it's going to benefit you. I want to just go over some frequently asked questions while you're putting your comments in the chat. And I did want to peek in the chat. Okay. People say both. Some people say, thank you guys. Some people are saying nonprofit. I have both. So I have both, but they work separately as not as arms on each other. So good. I have a lot of people here that probably here just for information. And if there's some information that you already know, just pass that along to somebody else and we'll just move forward. So some of the frequently asked questions for those of you who just have one or the other, what's the difference between nonprofit and for-profit, nonprofit versus for-profit? So some people start a for-profit business because they are doing something, they need funding, they need venture capitalists, they need loans from the bank. And people who start nonprofits are usually doing it because they see a problem, right? Both of them are businesses. I hear people all the time say a nonprofit is not a business. Tell me in the chat, you think a nonprofit is a business, and especially for both of you who say, I have both. Do you think it's a business? Yes, I see that. Oh, yeah, both. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Karen says, absolutely. Nicole says, it really is. And so they both are businesses. So they both have bills, right? They both have to generate income. The only difference between the nonprofit and the for-profit, once a for-profit reaches a certain mark, that organization or business can then go on the stock market, trade shares, grow millions and billions. That is the way they can grow. But a nonprofit, after it pays for all its expenses, it turns around and uses its profit for the general public. And it could be for social, economic, religious, all different kinds of reasons. We're going to get into the types of 501(c)s in a moment. So again, both can make a profit, but many believe that they're nonprofit because they can't make a profit. That's a whole different story. So nonprofits should be making a profit. Don't think of the word nonprofit as just, we can't make a profit. I hear that all the time. Nonprofits come to me and say, I heard we couldn't make a profit. Yes, nonprofit can make a profit. Now, nonprofits creating for profits, which I hope you are doing, because I'm going to show you in just a moment how nonprofits have gone to the level of making millions and billions of dollars. I said billions with a B. And they're all over and they're all around us. And some we don't even know they're nonprofits. But nonprofits usually create for profit in order to carry out some activities significantly that's different from its original mission. For example, if you have a food pantry, you might then create a thrift shop in order to generate some income to pay for staff. So that's an idea that nonprofits do. I see that quite often, and I believe that nonprofits should do that. You always should be generating some type of income. But when you do that, you may be required, not able, excuse me, required to pay what the IRS calls unrelated business income. So a portion of that income from the nonprofit, because it's for profit, will be taxed. You'll pay taxes on that. And let's talk about for profits who create nonprofits. A lot of us see those as foundations. So nonprofits sometimes, excuse me, a for profit sometimes will create a nonprofit entity so that they can use their income and put it into that foundation, and they decide who gets the money. Because guess what? They're going to be taxed on that portion of money and lose it anyway. So that's why a lot of for profits create a nonprofit. Now, there are some for profits who are totally separate. And because a moment I said corporate foundation, but there are some who are really doing this for charitable purposes. And that's where we get into the difference of the different types of 501(c)s. I hope I'm not talking too fast. And a lot of you who say both, you know what I mean when I say the word 501(c). It's just the nonprofit status, and I'll get into that just a moment. So again, the for-profit usually sets up a nonprofit arm to provide grants or to often do something outside of what they were doing, or a lot of times to match what the organization is doing. I'm going to show you an example in a moment, but I'm going to this is just coming to mind. We know that let's use Coca-Cola. We know brands like that, McDonald's. If I start naming some, you'll know all of them. I don't even have to say their name. I just say the Golden M, the cow with the chicken. You know who I'm talking about. You know I'm talking about Chick-fil-A. So a lot of them are for profits and they'll start their nonprofit arm. I love you guys are putting comments in the chat. So let's talk about some of these nonprofits who make a profit with unrelated business income. A lot of Salvation Army, I know everybody on here has seen the Salvation Army, but that's one of the largest non-governmental organizations. And we say non-governmental as well as nonprofit or 501(c)(3). It all means the same thing. But they provide social services. We just think of the Salvation Army as the thrift store, but they're an organization that provide a lot of social services, education, resources, GED programs. There are so many that I can go down, but they, according to the IRS, they bring in over $6 billion annually. That is huge, right? Again, that's a nonprofit who is making profit. And if you have a for profit, you can do the same thing. You can start a nonprofit doing something similar to what your mission is, but yet the mission would be to help the community, and you can do something like this. Now, here's another one. This is B1. It looks like it's saying the word big, but basically it's an amateur sport league. I don't know if you guys know this, but even the NFL, the National Football League, Dallas Cowboys, Pittsburgh Steelers, you name, put all your favorite teams in there. That is a nonprofit organization. And like I said, there are so many around you wouldn't even realize, but they are nonprofit because they provide sports and athletics. So they're under the sports league. Yes, I see people typing in the chat. So they are a huge nonprofit, but they are what the IRS calls a 501(c)(6). I'll get into that in a moment. But all these big, excuse me, B1G, all these big colleges who has conferences, and all of the things that they make, from the football game, the football channel, to basketball tournaments, you name it. They're making huge money, as you guys know. The tickets are outrageous. Don't come for me if we play this on YouTube, but the tickets, some of the tickets are outrageous and people are reselling them at a higher number. That's beside the point. But my point is that they are making huge profits. I just want to show you something just to give you an idea for you to see because this came up on my phone the other day and I was like, wow, I want to show people this so you can see the image. It says meet the nonprofits using private jets for philanthropic missions. So you know they must be making a lot of money, but they are a nonprofit. And I imagine they have a for-profit arm too. So this is something that you have to think about when you are a for-profit, because this is strictly about for-profit setting up a nonprofit, how you can then use that funds to help more people. As somebody said, I think the term is social enterprise now. We'll get into that. But enough of that. I just wanted to show you that image, just to leave that with you. Let's get into the strategic benefits of you forming a nonprofit under or separate, whatever for your for profit. So, number one, if you set up a nonprofit, then of course you can get grants. A lot of you on here already say you have both. So, you already know what you have to do in order to apply for grants. It is a process. So, if you have grants, it can expand your mission beyond your profit side by addressing some of the social needs of the people you're trying to help. Now, this is public good app. So we're talking about people who start technology. Some of you may not be a part of public good apps, but usually people who are trying to build technology to help nonprofits. This is another way that you can help them set up a separate nonprofit, expand the needs of the community, saying that you're helping them, and then you could apply for grants for your nonprofit. The other benefit is the sales tax exemption. So we know most states make you go through the extra mile of getting that 501c3. There are some states that do not require you to go to the next level. So I'm going to go through the steps a little later of how to start a nonprofit. But in most states, I'm going to use Florida, for example, because that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. If an organization incorporates as a nonprofit, it does have to go to the next level of filing for 501c3 to be exempt from state sales tax exemption because your nonprofit status is the federal tax exemption. And that is what you need in order to get a grant. Or if I write a donation, I can write off of my taxes. But in Florida, if you are a church, you do not have to have the 501c3 in order to be exempt from sales tax. You want to check with your state to see what your state rules are. But the next benefit is the tax deductible contributions, kind of what I mentioned before. Now, this is the plus side. So, a nonprofit arm can receive donations for the nonprofit, and the donations are tax deductible for your donor. That's a win. You're receiving the donations, your donors can write it off on their taxes. And another big one is brand reputation and trust by Habitat for Humanity. People trust them. They're building houses. My aunt was blessed to get a house from them, but they grew to a larger organization. They started small, but they grew and people trust them. So having that nonprofit arm, it signals that your company is committed to the community for the social good, and you build trust with the clients, the Home Depots and all that. Just the question. Hey, I see somebody wanted to say, oh yeah, put your questions in the chat for me if you have a question. So those are just a few benefits. I'm sure you can add more. And if you'd like to, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. Now, I keep using the word 501c, and I also mentioned 501c6 when I mentioned the NFL. Those of you who are not familiar, there are 27 types of 501c. And the 501c is just the designation that the IRS gives to a nonprofit organization. So if you're a charitable organization, you are classified as a 501c3. And by the way, this one is the most, I'm going to say that again, this one is the most favorable tax status because it is the only one whereby if I write you a check, I can write it off of my taxes. The rest, the 501c6, your chamber, your sororities, your fraternities, social welfare clubs, the club itself is tax exempt. They don't pay taxes on the income that's coming in, but I cannot write it off on my taxes, my Rotary Club dues or anything like that. So those are just some examples of 501c3, 501c4, 6. As you can see that if you want to take a screenshot, but you're going to get the slides and some hyperlinks to the slides. So for those of you who said that you have both, this is one thing I want to show you because I saw this and I was like, oh my God, this right here, your board members, if you're already a nonprofit, the board that you have is the board that you build. And for those of you who have not started, this goes for your for profit side too. But if you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, just keep in mind the team of the board that you have is the one that you build. So if it's your vision, you're the one who's seeing the future, you got to make sure that the people who behind you have the skill set that you need to help keep the organization healthy financially. That's the main thing, right? You want to keep the organization healthy financially, but there's other things that you need to check in with your board members and make sure they are in the right role. Board members, team members, whatever you want to call them. I love that. A board doesn't happen to you. You need to be proactively build the board that you need. That's right, Eli. You really do. You really have to be building the board. And that a lot of times that's building relationships. And that's a whole nother webinar. But I just thought that this was important to say. So let's talk about some more things to consider. And then I want to pause for any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Here's some other things to consider if you want to create a nonprofit. And then if you already have a nonprofit, just keep in mind the synergy between the nonprofit and the for profit is usually a good thing. The nonprofit arm can serve as the innovation lab or kind of an incubator if you want to test ideas, solutions that you think might work before you bring it to the market for the for-profit side. I've seen a lot of people start that way. And I've seen people who start as a for-profit when they should have been a nonprofit and vice versa. People who start as a nonprofit when they should have been a for-profit. That's another whole nother webinar. But another good thing to consider is attracting talent. This is a way where you can have a dual mission, where you can have interns, people who are thinking about the vision of the organization, and this is something they're passionate about. If you're into technology, just think about all the young Gen Zs or whatever. I don't know about those letters, so I shouldn't even open my mouth just a moment ago. X's who are thinking about technology in the future, and this is things that they're conscious about. So giving them access to learn under you, and then you also provide a pool of people who are future focused, and this is their first ground to start. Think about those volunteer hours that you can use. Diversifying the revenue streams is another thing. So having that nonprofit can open the door for funding models like the grants, donations, and corporate sponsorships. So it will add to your financial diversity, if you will. Now, if you have a for-profit and a nonprofit, I'm curious if they're both working together, and I would love to hear from you in the chat. Are you sharing the same goals and the same resources? Exactly the same resources, because usually a for-profit can promote the nonprofit side, and the nonprofit is usually not promoting the for-profit side. Let me say that again. The for-profit side can promote, let's use your website, for example. You can promote on your website, visit our nonprofit in order to find out what more we do. And I'll show you an example on the next slide. But the nonprofit can't say, hey, go to our website, our for-profit website, and purchase our t-shirts. That's usually what they call a conflict of interest, or it appears to be a conflict of interest. And that's one of the things the IRS wants nonprofits to avoid it appearing or being a conflict of interest. Volunteer engagement, I cannot say enough. If you create a nonprofit, most nonprofits are run 100% by volunteers, and they've been able to accomplish many things. So I would love to know in the chat how many of you are ran mostly volunteers. A lot of you, if you are an executive director of a nonprofit, you're probably a volunteer. It's important to keep track of those hours because if you Google the word independent sector, value of a volunteer hour, just those words, or just put value of a volunteer hour, that changes usually every April and it's different by state. So right now in Florida is $30 and some change. So somebody just said we used 25 volunteers just this past year. So imagine if you use 25 volunteers and they volunteer a total of 100 hours. Somebody do the math for me. Multiply the 100 hours with the 20 volunteers times $30 an hour. That's the value of what they bought to your nonprofit, where you were able to feed those thousands of people. And so when you apply for a matching grant, you match that with the volunteer hours. That's just one way that you can use the volunteer hours, and the volunteer engagement is really important. So that's one of the main benefits too of having that nonprofit. And again, I can say enough of the other funding opportunities. A lot of times when you are for profit and you go somewhere and people with money might say, God, this is a great idea. I really would help you if you're a nonprofit. I don't know why they say that, but I've heard people do that a lot. I was just talking to a client the other day and she said, yeah, somebody said I should have been nonprofit because she has a tutoring organization and it's an LLC, a tutoring business. And I said, are you charged? She goes, yes, I charge. I didn't think you could charge for if I was a nonprofit. And I was like, yes, you can. You can charge if you are a nonprofit. So that's where people get confused. So this is an example of a for-profit that has a nonprofit. This is called 15 Light Years. They provide builders with and people who are building their own homes with clean energy solutions. So every time a builder develops, donates, excuse me, a builder or a developer or a homeowner uses their services, they take a portion of that and it go back into the community. So they started 15 Light Years Foundation. So it's two separate business. You know the brand by 15 light years. And then they started a foundation to then provide education to the community and outreach to the community. They give things during holidays and things like that. This is an organization that I started. It's not mine. I prepared the paperwork in 2017, and they're still around and they're still doing well. So that just shows you the example and the power of having a separate. I'm gonna take a pause because I feel like I've been talking too much. I'm gonna go to the chat. Eli, if you want to read some questions from the chat, I would love to see your questions that you had for me.
Yeah,
Oh, I
I've
can.
got a lot of good questions coming in. So here's the first one, and it comes in from D, who's asking for a little bit of recommendation, which is it good for both of these entities to have a similar name, or would you recommend that they sometimes go with separate brands?
Yeah, this example I just gave you with 15 light years, she branded herself so people will know when they see that 15 light years foundation, then they know it's from her organization. But it's based on what you wanna do. Now, if you had 15 light years foundation, excuse me, 15 light years, and then you want to open up a food pantry, I would name it something else. I might name it 15 light years food pantry, or not even use 15 light years. So it depends on what you wanna do. I'm not against it, so it just depends on what you wanna do. I hope that helped you. That's a great
Awesome.
question.
We've got a couple of the questions here. So Anasua asks, how aligned should these two entities be? Can the nonprofit entity have the same mission and work area as the for-profit, or should they have slightly different goals? What actually mission and wise, besides the legal structure, is often the differentiation between these two entities?
I know. And sometimes it's a fine line because your nonprofit is solely to serve the community. It serves in the public interest. So whether you're doing something educational, charitable, giving things away, teaching, whether you're religious or but you're for profit. And I'm not sure if I would love to know what your for profit does. But if it's a for profit that's, let's use Coca-Cola. How can Coca-Cola, who make Coke, say that they're a nonprofit? So it just depends. I hope that helps. Or did I make sense,
Yeah, I've
Eli?
actually got a related question here, which is sort of digs into that, which is, so you've got a charitable arm and you've got your social enterprise, like a for-profit side of you. How do you typically transfer those funds between those two arms? Are you contracting as the nonprofit out to the for-profit to do some mission-aligned work with the charity, or how's that typically thought of?
Yeah, they're two separate businesses. They're two separate businesses. And you're not really transferring money unless you want to be a foundation. You're a for-profit corporation and you put a portion of your money into your nonprofit, but the nonprofit is not transferring money back to the for-profit. They're two separate businesses.
So it's two separate business like bank accounts. Like, yeah, you can't merge them all on the back end. Like they have to have
Right.
separate boards, be separate there. But
Exactly.
so you've got this foundation, you applied for a grant for something that is a mission aligned for also the for the social enterprise.
Mhm.
So how do you leverage that funds that you've now raised through a grant and use that for the for-profits work to advance the larger mission?
You're really not using it for the for-profit work. You're using it, and hopefully your for-profit, what you're doing is aligning with your nonprofit so that people know, oh, this is about 15 Light Years Foundation. This is what they do. Those two missions align because 15 Light Years, I'm glad I'm using that example. They are providing education and social outreach on the nonprofit side, but they're just discussing what energy solutions are. In that case, you're just promoting it by word of mouth, but not financially. You know what I'm saying? You might, if
Yeah,
you're,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, by word of mouth. That's all.
And so the two more questions that we can dive back in again. So another one from Adesua who says, can the nonprofit offer scholarships for children to utilize services that the for-profit offers? Is that one of the ways you could support the two enterprises in
Yeah.
that way?
As perfect example. Yes, absolutely. 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 And that is, I think that kind of answers the questions that were asked earlier. That's why you would set up a nonprofit because if people said we can't afford to go, then somebody would say we have a nonprofit and Eli provides scholarships for the nonprofit. So yeah, that's a great example.
Right. So that basically helps them to say, yeah, we're going to consume the services of the for-profit by, as you say, scholarships or other ways by sort of spending money with the other entity. Cool. That's really helpful. And then I've got a last question, which is a bit more Canada specific. So Laura asked, so we're a for-profit social impact startup incorporated in Canada. And so the question is, could they register as a 501c in the US without a US location? And I have a little bit of experience I could share around there. But Aretha, when you've helped organizations set up US charities, do they have to have a physical presence in the US to do so?
They do not. They do not. And I've set up a lot of people they live here and they may go back and forth to Africa and the mission is in Africa or the entity, the schools are in Africa. They only need the nonprofit status here in the US because the US citizens want to write up on their tax and they want to donate. Because the 501c3 obviously won't benefit you in Canada or Africa. You only do it to get the donations here in the US.
Yeah, that's been my experience when I was working at the David Suzuki Foundation, which is a Canadian charity. There's two ways any American could donate money to us as a Canadian charity. We just weren't going to offer a tax receipt. But they did set up with a charitable lawyer, basically a PO box in a lawyer's office in the US that gave them there for a separate US entity. And so they would have to also set up a US board for that US entity. But yeah, they set up a US charity so they could issue US tax receipts. And then from time to time, they would basically take on a project and support the Canadian charity. And so that's how they would transfer the funds before. We're like, we as one foundation are basically going to sponsor the foundation's work in the Canadian side of things. So that's how that was structured there. Oh, and we've got another even more technical question, which is there a minimum number of actual people you need to start a 501c3 or capital requirements? What is the minimum you need to fire up a new US 501c3?
Great question. A minimum of 3 people. I think I was gonna go over that in a moment. A minimum of 3 people. However, those 3 people cannot be majority family members. So if myself and my brother are one of the 3s or 2 of the 3, excuse me, I need to have 3 other people who aren't related to me and my brother to make it an odd number. So it has to be an odd number, but a minimum of 3 without family being the majority rule. How about the capital requirements? I'm gonna go over that in just a moment. Yeah, on the next slide, let's get into that.
Awesome. Yeah, let's dive right back into this. But people, thank you so much for keep on throwing questions into the chat and we'll queue them up again for the next half.
Okay, perfect. He was asking, or somebody was asking, do founders need to be a US citizen? At least one of them, because you need somebody to be a registered agent. Yes, so absolutely. Okay, so here are the steps. Many of you already have your 501c3. Like I said, you can go get your drink of water on this part, but Here are the steps. First, you want to do, obviously, you want to get your board. Remember, I said earlier, the board you have is the board you build. You want to build a great board because the next thing you want to do is incorporate in your state. And that's every state has electronic filing, believe it or not. Some states still make you mail them in. My state is one. They do have the online form, that the online form does not give you the space to type what's required by the IRS. And so I would encourage you, you must read the instructions. A lot of people just go to the form and, oh, I can do it online, but and just start typing and boom, it's done. Woo, it's done. But you missed the part where they say if you intend to file for 501c3, you must include the IRS verbiage. It would take me too long to go through that right now because we only have an hour for this. I want to make sure I get your questions. So that is usually on the instructions. So make sure that you check the information out. The second thing, you'll get your employee identification number. And I would wait until you incorporate it because I've seen people go and get the EIN number, and then someone else has the business name. And so then you have to get another EIN because what the EIN is like a social security number to your business. And a lot of people got 15 EINs. Every time you get one, the IRS says, oh, this is a new business. So you're in business when you get that EIN. That's when the clock starts. So it only takes 2 minutes to get that on the IRS website. You can go to their website, irs.gov, and get that. Your bylaws, you want to make sure when you do your bylaws that you have conflict of interest statements that is required by the IRS. If you go to the IRS website, irs.gov, look on the application for 1023, you will see a sample of the conflicts of interest. You can take those, make them your own, but you must have a conflict of interest on there because it asks you on the application. And then the last thing, and really not the last thing in some states, but the fourth thing is to apply for the 501c3. That's the last step for getting started. And I'll show you what that form looks like in just a moment. I was going to say, so these are the main 4 steps, but some states make you go the extra mile. Remember, I mentioned the sales tax earlier. So after you get the 501c3 in some states, you then have to file for the sales tax exemption. And then some even make you also apply for fundraising activities. So make sure you check with your state. Again, I'll have hyperlinks, Eli, for the links in here. Feel free to copy this information when you get your video replay. But this is where you would go. I mentioned irs.gov, but when you want to file the application for 501c3, you got to go to pay.gov. If you haven't been there yet, it's good to go there now and go ahead and create your account because they now go through, the government is using this ID Me. I don't know if you've used it yet, but now they're making you identify yourself to make sure there is no fraud and it is you. Final thing is, this is what the 1023, there's 2 1023s. The 1023 is just the name of the form application for 501c3. So it's just the form name for the application for 501c3. There's a short one, 1023EZ, and then there's the long one. How do you know which one to use? When you are a small organization and somebody asks about capital investments, here's where we get to this point. When you're a small organization, you're proposing, because you really don't know, that your income over the next 3 years is going to be under $50,000, then you would use the 1023EZ. So it only costs you a few fees to start. Somebody asked me how much investment. Your state fee, the state fee ranges from $25 up to $100, depends on what state you're in. Texas, $25, $50 if you want to expedite it. Florida's $87.50. Tennessee, $100. Different states have a different fee for incorporating. And then your IRS fee is the 1023, the short form is $275 as of today. Sometimes they change the fees. I've been around since 99. The fee has gone up and down. And then the long form, anybody who is a church who wants to start a transition home, low-income housing, a hospital, a university, or et cetera, they would use the long form 1023. It's about 29 pages, and that fee is $600. So those would be your expenses for starting your nonprofit. I would definitely like to see your questions in the chat. So I'm going to get ready to close this up and say, you can do this yourself. That's why I went through the steps. This is one of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. So, whether you have a for profit or a nonprofit, I'm sure that is something that you love to do. If it is not, then maybe you should just help somebody who is doing it and that loves to do it. But I'm sure you're doing it because you love to do it. I would ask that you would book me if you would like for me to walk you through doing this yourself. Some people say, "Hey, I got stuck on this part." I would show you how to do this in a separate one-on-one. Or if you would like for me to do it, you can book me to do it for you. But you can do this yourself. Now, I am going to log off and make sure I answer all your questions. Eli, I'm ready for additional questions.
Excellent. Yeah, we've got some more great questions coming in, and that's just going to inspire, I'm sure, more of you to keep on throwing things into the chat. We've got a couple of questions here coming in from somebody who's going by NC. And so the first question was really about, you talked a little bit about the number of people you needed to start up a new charitable organization, but do those founders need to be, or those board members need to be US citizens, or can it be anyone from anywhere?
At least one needs to be a US citizen because somebody has to have a social security number. Do y'all have social security numbers in other countries? I don't know. That's a question. You have social
We've
security
got often equivalents, but it sounds like so the US requires at least one
number?
person be
Mhm.
a full-on US citizen with a social insurance number because you'll need that for the application then.
For the EIN, yes.
Yeah.
Great questions.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. But I've got another question here, which is around basically composition of those boards. So say you've got these two organizations, what kind of overlap, if any, can I have in the boards between my for-profit organization and my charitable organization?
Oh, so good because I know so many small nonprofits are doing this. You got I used the food pantry earlier. You got the food pantry and you're running the food pantry, you're the executive director, and then you have the thrift shop that's right next door to the food pantry, and you have to run that too. And so a lot of people have to do that for a while. But when it becomes a conflict of interest, then you would need to find somebody else to run this. But you're supposed to keep it separate. You're supposed to have different boards, different members, employees running that organization. So it try to avoid a conflict of interest.
So it sounds like there isn't a strict rule, but rather a conflict of interest rule. And so it sounds like the base minimum is you would recommend that you don't have a majority overlap between, but maybe having one or two people in between would be okay.
Yes. I would look at the IRS, go to the IRS website, look at that Form 1023, and they have information about conflict of interest. When you read those, you'll say, oh, this is a conflict of interest for us. You'll know because we can go down a rabbit hole talking about conflicts and what isn't.
I've got two questions coming in from both Laura and John who are really curious about this, how do you do this allocation of volunteer time? And so the question is this volunteer time an indirect contribution, or is it like or to the funded program? Like, how do you think about that when you actually think about tax forms?
Yeah, I know that could be confusing when we talk about the volunteer hour. The volunteer hour is not a contribution itself. The volunteer hour, you discuss the value of it when you're writing a grant, when you apply for a grant, and even when you're doing your 990, you're doing a 990 easy, not the e-postcard, because this doesn't allow you to put that information on there. But if I volunteer 100 hours for you and it's worth $30 an hour, say it's $3,000. I don't know if my math is right, but say it's worth $3,000. When you apply for grants and they ask you about your sources of income, then I love the way you put indirect and direct. You would put down at the bottom in kind services, and that would be the value of in kind services. And that might end up being $3,000 in that column. It's because they want to know how you're able to accomplish this. Well, you say you have all these volunteers, and this is how much money excuse me, I won't say money. This is the value. This is the monetary value of what they bring in helping us accomplish this. And I hope I answered that good. If not, we can unmute Laura or John to ask that live.
Yeah, that's a great idea because I think, yeah, we just want to make sure that we're getting into the proper
Yeah,
nitty-gritty of that.
exactly.
There you go. John just put up your hand, so I think I just gave you permission to come on mic. Let's see if I succeeded in that. Allow to talk.
Okay, thanks, Eli. This is John. Yeah, what I was referring to in that question is oftentimes when we apply for a grant, um, it's about a program in particular,
Mhm.
and having obviously an organization that can contribute to the program itself, and namely the volunteers. What I'm wondering is how that's generally reflected. I've seen direct expenses, indirect expenses. The volunteers in this case would be contributing to the program. We wouldn't be paying them, obviously, but
Right.
I'm just wondering what's the common nomenclature for that, if any, how that's generally handled.
I'm not sure I understand because you mentioned, go back and ask me in a different way, rephrase that.
Okay, we applied for a grant, and the grant maker asks you to do a budget.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
and the line item budget,
Yes.
there's going to be volunteers that will contribute to this program or the effort of making the program successful.
Mhm.
We know what the donor's going to offer as a grant, but we'll be also be putting, as you say, in-kind services in.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if you have any sense of how that might be reflected in a line item, so to speak.
Yes, that is where you go with the indirect, but also you can put in kind on there as a line item. You can put the word in kind because you've probably gotten more than just volunteer hours. You've probably gotten products or services that were donated as in kind. So you would
Yes,
make your own line item because a lot of times they don't have all the line items there that apply to you.
got it. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, and Laura, I've just given you the ability to also come on mic in case we just didn't quite get
Okay.
to
Hope that
your
helps.
specific take on it.
Well, thank you so much, Eli. Yeah, thank you both. Yeah, I think John covered it for the most part. But say, for instance, grants these days are asking for things like grantee contribution, matching funds, that kind of thing. And can I then say I have a grant upcoming and the project period is 6 months, and I know my team of 5 volunteers are going to contribute X number of hours? Can I then say that this is, as you were saying, Aretha, can I say that this is an in-kind contribution and therefore it is part of my contribution that isn't cash? Say it's a
Right.
$30,000 grant and I have to come up with matching $30,000 fund. I
Yes.
know that my volunteers' hours are going to be $8,000. Would that be accepted, or would they
Yeah.
just say no?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And that's where a lot of people make mistakes because they don't realize that your volunteer hours can be a part of the matching grant.
That's brilliant because my volunteers are really kick-ass and they never get enough credit.
Yeah, you could be
Love it.
very creative there. Obviously, I would say every foundation may have a different interpretation because I don't think this is like a set in law kind of thing. But I have a friend who has been using several creative ways around meeting out those matching requirements for grant
Mm,
applications. So he
yeah.
uses both his volunteer times, but he also actually uses other in-kind gifts. So he has like the Google for Nonprofits donation from Google for basically the Google ad campaign.
All
And he
right.
says, oh, and you basically get $10,000 of
Yeah.
ad credits every month. He's going to run a whole bunch of ad campaigns for this campaign during that time. So he also writes in $1,000 every month of contributed value basically from Google towards
Great
the
idea.
matched value in the program. And so that's another way you could be creative. Or it could be contracted time from like a design firm in your community who's helping you out. There's a number of ways you could come at this.
Yeah. In the rental space, it's somebody donating you the space or donating you the food. All of that is in
Oh,
kind.
wow.
And there's a value added to it.
And what
And there's a
about
number of things
things
there.
like,
Most things, go ahead, go ahead.
sorry, thank you. It's really interesting. What about things like we have campaigns where I will mentor a student and spend time doing that, and they will contribute to a project? Is that
Yep.
similar to putting a value on that? That would be
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I hope you're
Thank
keeping
you.
track of all of that. Yes, all of you. I hope you're keeping track of everything that you do.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful. I can't tell you.
You're welcome.
I got another question coming in here from Chrissy, who says, what if you file your 1022 easy, but then you get lucky and you actually bring in more money than expected? Like, how do you update that piece of paperwork?
Yeah, congratulations if that happens, but you don't have to upgrade it. You don't have to update it because what they're saying that you're doing it on a good faith estimates, you just report it on your 990 every year. Remember, you're tax exempt. So you're not paying on the income. They just want to know what's coming in. That's all. And they're just hoping that you would do the right thing. A lot of people ask that question. Yeah, there's no penalty.
Awesome. We're running up into the last 5 minutes. So if you've got a question, jump into the chat right now. But I've got one more question coming in here from Karen, who again is talking from a bit of the perspective of those of us with presences in more than one country. So in this case, Karen's saying, so say you're a dual citizen of another country like the US, Canada, and you've got the same mission in both countries. What's the benefit of potentially setting up a US nonprofit?
It depends on you. If you have lots of friends in the US and they say, we want to give, but do you have the 501c3? And you say no, then you lose out on that. Sometimes it's not worth it. So it depends on if it's worth it for you, if you see a benefit of it. I say be ready, always be ready to be ready. How about that?
But it sounds like so the core value for a lot of people is it opens up gifts that you might not otherwise get because you didn't have that tax receivable ability. And also, some foreign charities in other countries may only be able to transfer money to equivalent charities in their own country. It's actually one of the things TechSoup can help you with. If you're like, I'm a US charity and I want to give money to an organization in Mozambique, and I've got all this legal compliance that is required by the US government, they actually have a way to make that pretty smooth and easy. And so to me, that's, I think, as Aretha was saying, the real thing you would need to ask yourself is what is the potential added value that you would get because you are now able to offer US tax receipts? And is it worth the extra hassle of then having to manage that extra legal entity?
Any other questions? This is great, y'all. I didn't think there would be so many questions. I think that's it, Eli, right?
Yeah, that is fabulous. So first of all, thank you everyone for giving us a bit of your day. I'm grateful that you were able to come join us. And I'm really excited about all of the work that you're already doing because so many of you are already on this journey of having these two legal statuses because you can see the value that both having a company and its ability to raise money and have like capital and shares and the benefits that come with the charitable model, which is to say, we give access to these grants and we can work with volunteers and we can do all these other kinds of things. And how can we bring the best of those two together? I would encourage you, if you want to go deeper into this, reach out to Aretha. She is, as you can see, amazing and generous. And while she's not going to tell you to hire her, I will. You should definitely go and give her a bit of your money because she will save you so much grief and make this process smooth and easy with her years of expertise.
Thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.